So Magny-Cours will be magnificent for Michael Schumacher if he clinches the world title a little later on. But the gap between Ferrari and the others seems narrower this time. So what clues will warm-up give us? Time to go across to the men with all the clues and sometimes even the odd answer as well. John Watson and Ben Edwards.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everybody. Yes, the morning warm-up about to get underway. We're only about 30 seconds away from the track actually opening up this morning, and it's glorious once again, as we saw for qualifying. Perfect conditions. But, John, maybe we'll get a little bit more of an idea whether those Michelin tyres are going to work in the race as well as they did in qualifying yesterday.
Well, that's something I'm looking to see, because we've seen Michelin very dominant, in fact, throughout qualifying. But now we're back again. It's going to come out at 9:30 in France. The temperatures are going to be a lot lower than they will be when the Grand Prix starts at 2 o'clock in France. And the usual problem at Magny-Cours, where track temperatures are big bearing on lap time and performance. So 2 McLarens coming out, followed by Toyotas and then Minardis. It will give us a clue in one respect. Maybe the lap time that we saw from qualifying bears no resemblance to where any individual driver may finish up after this 30-minute session. Traditionally, it's a 2-stop Grand Prix. This year, because tyre compounds no doubt are marginally softer than in previous years, we may even see more than that from some runners. Last year, 2 drivers went for that 3-stop strategy, Rubens Barrichello and David Coulthard. Big risk to take, but with fewer cars in the field, remember only 19 cars starting, it may actually change some teams' decisions or thoughts about how many stops they want to make and what will be most advantageous to them with their particular tyre.
Well, it's a good turnout here to cheer on the Ferraris as ever, but Michael Schumacher beaten to that pole position, as we saw yesterday, by the narrowest of margins, some 23 thousandths of a second. Where it will be very interesting to see how that battle progresses in the race itself. Now, there's a choice, of course, of 2 different compound of tyre, whether you're running a Michelin or Bridgestone. And Peter, I think you've got some more information on which tyres the teams have chosen.
Yes, I have indeed, Ben. No surprise that at the Bridgestone side of the fence, Ferrari and Sauber have chosen to run the harder of the 2 compounds. No surprise there, really. Michelin, however, big differences. McLaren have gone for the softer Michelin. Williams and Toyota only have gone for the harder of the 2 Michelin compounds. So we must bear that in mind when we look at lap times this morning. John was absolutely correct in what he said about 3-stop strategies coming into the day. The computer simulations are actually showing at the moment that a 3-stop strategy is 10 seconds faster than a 2-stop. So I think we'll see quite a lot of runners going for that 3-stop option. But remember that although the Michelin has proved to be very, very quick in qualifying, the indication so far is that it has a bigger drop-off in lap time after that first lap than the Bridgestone. But once it's settled into it, there's not a lot between them. Could be a very interesting race.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Peter. Very interesting. And interesting to note, I suppose, that Montoya was able to take that pole with the slightly harder compound Michelin, and perhaps that was even more the reason for his pleasure afterwards. Ralf Schumacher didn't manage to do quite the same with that harder compound. Just messed up, particularly the last couple of corners. He was cross with himself afterwards. He said it was down to himself. That last corner in particular messed it up, and that's put him back onto the 3rd row of the grid, and that's actually Ralph's worst qualifying performance of the year so far. He's always been on the first couple of rows, so a little bit disappointed, but the chance to make up for it in the race this afternoon. Montoya, well, he was very satisfied, delighted with that pole position, and Berger once again was very congratulatory afterwards, saying fantastic performance to take that pole position slot 5th time in a row.
Well, 2 things to note, I think, Ben. First of all, the fact that Montoya on that harder tyre, which he ran last year, Montoya consciously gave up the chance last year to go for a front row grid position, to go for durability, and it did pay. Unfortunately, Ralf Schumacher interrupted rather on that particular situation. Nevertheless, Ralf Schumacher did have pole last year. This year he's all the way down in 5th place in the 3rd row of the grid, and no doubt Ralf Schumacher upset, not just because he's on the 3rd row of the grid, but because Montoya has taken a 5th consecutive pole position. And this sort of drip feed between the 2 Williams drivers is now, I think, really beginning to get to Ralf Schumacher, and if he wants to dominate or get back into a dominant position within the team, he's got to do something about it pretty soon.
Right, now I believe Matt's got the opportunity to speak to somebody very interesting.
He's always interesting. His name's Eddie Jordan. Eddie, thanks for joining us. I didn't think you would after round 1 of your bout with Watson on Friday, but we're setting you up for round 2 now, and inquiries over to exactly what happened with Heinz-Harald Frentzen. How close were you to getting him into Fisichella's car?
Well, we were
very close. I think it was quite a surprise to a lot of people. But you know, Heinz came here to race. Jordan came here to race. So it was a natural thing, and of course people seem to think that there's a friction between Heinz and myself, and that's quite untrue. He's won here 3 years ago in a Jordan car, and I asked him was he interested in driving the car if we could get the permission, and that permission was granted. But sadly at the very end of the day there were a couple of things that just weren't possible to move, and that's why it hasn't happened.
Eddie, just on those couple of things, was one of them the High Court case pending between your company and Heinz's management company regarding when you fired him last year while he was still under contract to you?
It was the first issue that was put in place, of course. It was discussed, and with regard to that particular case, it was an unconditional situation where there weren't any conditions attached. It was, if you like, a gesture, a sporting gesture. We have a car available, which sadly Giancarlo Fisichella wasn't able to drive, and we put the hand out. He did also, but through his and our best efforts, it wasn't possible. But there was a real meaningful effort and discussion that went on for hours and hours and hours to make it possible, but at the very end of the day it failed.
Eddie, if you'd just written out a cheque to Heinz and said, look, there's the balance of the money he wants, he would have been in that car right now, so why didn't you do that?
John, I love you, you're such an old...
Eddie, answer the question, less of the old waffle, let's know the truth here.
John, you've become very powerful with those cans on your head. And that
you watch me, EJ. When I get going, you'll know all about it. Now, come on. Why did you not write a cheque and get the guy in the car? Look, there's 350 million people around the world want to see 2 Jordan cars in this race, and you're denying them.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely untrue. John, it's quite the opposite. I think we came here to race. Everybody wanted to see as many cars in this race as possible. For me personally, it's sad because Heinz has had great memories here, and I think confusing it by some legal argument that there may have been, in fact, it's quite the opposite, and you can check that if you want, which I know you will. But I'm saddened because I hate only seeing one Jordan car starting on the grid, and it really irritates me. We did everything possible, and right from Bernie all the way down, every angle was made sure that it was possible that there would be this exception. It would have been a precedent, of course, and it would have been quite novel and unique. But sadly, at the end of the day, despite, as I've already said, everyone's best efforts, and not to be confused by you and your monetary-minded brain, of course.
Anyway, Eddie, look, you're doing great. We're sorry you're not out there. Hopefully we'll see two Jordans running in the German Grand Prix in a week's time. Good luck for this afternoon.
I appreciate it, John. Thanks. Good for the banter. Bye.
Well, in fact, Sato has just broken down at the end of the pit lane, so EJ might have some stuff to attend to there, because Sato's just leapt out of his car, run back up the pit lane, and is presumably going to jump out in the other. Now, I'm not sure which one he was in there, whether he was just about to try the spare, so he will therefore get back into the race car. I'm not sure which one he was out of, but we will check that. Michael trying both cars. He has tried both cars now, so back into his race car. There is Sato's car being pushed up the pit lane. He just made it down to the launch control area, and something went wrong, and he came back up.
The launch control didn't work. There's an alarm coming on, and that's why I tried to push the red button that didn't work at all, and hit the blue button and then got stalled immediately. And also the T-car, the power steering didn't work properly. Very, very heavy and very notchy as well. And the race car, the T-car is okay to go straight, the T-car, but still like this. Oh no, race car, this car is like this. T-car is okay, but race car like this.
Okay, we're running out of time, so we'll try and live with it for now, Tack. We'll try and get one more lap in the T-car, check it out again if we can. But we'll do 2 times laps now, but we'll go out, do once through the pit lane practice starts, clutch pipe point now, and then 2 times laps, and I'll call you in.
So it's a busy morning. They've only got one driver to run, John, but it sounds as though it's all happening down there.
Yes, it's been a tough weekend for Jordan, and in spite of the banter between Eddie and myself, it's a great shame that we only have one Jordan running this afternoon, and in spite of all the efforts to get Heinz into the car, it was inevitable, in my opinion, that the legal side of the issue would take precedence over the emotional side. Well, talk about emotion, Kimi Raikkonen 0.3 of a second up on Ralf Schumacher's time just established literally a few seconds ago. But interestingly, it's Ralf Schumacher's teammate Montoya who's out of his car. He's out on the pit wall. Again, indication of the policy that BMW operate, that when they're running on a mileage engine situation, they're not going to overrun the car in this morning's warm-up. So expect to see Montoya come out in the last 10 minutes. And now Raikkonen 1:16.7. And that is actually about, well, 3/4 of a second away from last year's fastest race lap, which was done on lap 53 of a 72-lap race by David Coulthard. And probably going to see minimum of 2, and as Peter indicated from the pit lane, quite a number of teams looking at that 3-stop strategy, particularly with only 19 cars starting this afternoon's Grand Prix.
That's right, yes, less traffic problems. Potentially Ralph's gone off. Ralph's had a spin, and hopefully the car's okay. That's at Chateau d'Eau, the right-hander that heads back towards the pit area. As he got on the brakes, I would imagine, it just got away from him. David Coulthard, meanwhile, also looking good. And it's interesting to note that Raikkonen's time from the qualifying session yesterday was within 0.3 of a second of pole position. There is Montoya. You talked about him being out of the car, John, and perhaps, as you say, they're just trying to limit the mileage on the engine. He's happy he had pole position, and Ralph perhaps doing some of the race setup work, but Ralph just threw it away here.
Yes, here comes through the Imano chicane, turns into Chateau d'Eau. The usual thing, on the brakes, and the back end just drifts around. And indication yet again how this circuit is affected by temperatures. At the moment, relatively low. It's just below 20 degrees ambient, and probably about the same on the track. But by the time we get to 2 o'clock, that will be changed.
A 16.7 followed by a 16.4 for Raikkonen. 2 quick laps there together. That's another view of Ralph.
Well, on the preceding lap, Ralph had gone quickest, then Raikkonen went faster again. But nevertheless, car feels probably quite comfortable, not a problem. Patrick Head looking at it and thinking, what is he doing?
Well, Ralph may be a little under pressure. Made the mistake in qualifying yesterday. Finds himself back on the third row of the grid in 5th place alongside David Coulthard. But the top 6 very close, covered basically by half a second in qualifying yesterday. So we're seeing very, very competitive times, and we'll see whether Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello on their Bridgestone tyres are going to be able to find a little edge for this afternoon's race. Now, we saw the Honda-powered cars using a revised engine, but a slightly different strategy, I think, chosen on the engine use between Panis Villeneuve. Peter, I think you've got more information for us on that.
Well, no, actually, it was a very bit of quick thinking by Olivier Panis. I'm sure John would approve of this. Once Olivier yesterday saw Giancarlo go in the wall, and once he knew that Giancarlo was okay, within a couple of minutes he'd put in a request to see if he could get the use of the Giancarlo qualifying engine for the race today. Quite quick thinking, I think, on his part. Honda looked at it, but eventually the reason came through that they wouldn't do it was that there was a difference between the water systems on the 2 cars, and he couldn't run a Jordan Honda engine in a BAR Honda. Whether or not that's the real reason, we'll never know. But of course, today, Takuma Sato, I think, is the only Honda driver racing that new spec engine. And of course, it's Giancarlo's engine that he would have used in qualifying.
Well, that's an interesting situation. I wondered, we could look into that further perhaps, because I noted from the reports yesterday, David Richards said they had a slightly different strategy with their 2 cars, and I wondered whether Villeneuve might be tempted to use the engine in the race. They said that they'd kept the revs a little lower in qualifying on Villeneuve's car in an attempt to make sure that they were able to use it for the race, but we'll try and check that story out later on. We have just seen Ralf Schumacher have another little spin.
Yes, and we're watching Michael Schumacher, but it's in fact Rubens Barrichello who's the quickest car right now, fastest through that first sector. And I mean, what's very important, I think, in this session is to see what times these teams are doing. Going back to what I said about Coulthard last year, he did that 3-stop strategy. He set the fastest race lap on lap 53. Now, if anybody exceeds Coulthard's time, 1:16.088, and Michael's on a 1:15.4, you can guarantee that Ferrari are looking at doing a 3-stop strategy based on the lap we've just seen from the world champion. And Barrichello currently potentially on an even quicker lap. He has got to come up, he's coming through that final chicane, so watch and see what Barrichello does. 15.425 is the time to beat Michael Schumacher. No, 15, well, it is 2.55, so he's a 10th of a second quicker. So both Ferraris right now, judged by the times we're seeing, would be on a 3-stopper. That's the replay of what we saw Ralf Schumacher do just a moment ago down at the Melbourne Hairpin. Oh yeah, we'll take it, it's the Adelaide Hairpin. In fact, same continent, wrong car. So down at the Adelaide Hairpin. And it's all action in this 30-minute session. Normally never too much excitement, but right now we're seeing Ferrari clearly exposing their hand The next fastest car up after the two Ferraris is David Coulthard on a 16.2, and that's some, well, 0.2 of a second away from his fastest race lap last year.
So I don't know what Juan Pablo's telling fiancée Connie, but he seemed fairly amazed by whatever it was. Just a quick note that Rubens Barrichello, who went onto that three-stop strategy last year, he was actually, I think they were originally going to go for two stops, so they brought him back onto a three-stop. He stopped on laps 21, 36 and 54, and it worked very effectively for him to move him up into third place at the end of the race behind Michael and Ralf Schumacher. So we'll have to see what happens. Taking another look at Michael here, and very quick laps being set by him. Barrichello as well, 15.2 for Barrichello and 15.4 for Michael.
Well, there's Rubens taking the shortcut. That's through the Imola chicane, and no doubt he well and truly backed off, and that would not be a lap that would be credited to the Brazilian. Nevertheless, Barrichello still quickest on 15.255. Michael next, then it's Nick Heidfeld in this harbour coming up into third place. David Coulthard we're now watching down to fourth place, but as a personal best for Coulthard, he's gone third, so he made an improvement in first and third sectors, and the McLaren on that softer of the two Michelin tyres, very effective indeed.
So a lot of it will come down to strategy today, and how much fuel to start the race, and how far you go into the race before refueling. It could be a fascinating contest this afternoon between McLaren, Williams and Ferrari. They're all looking very, very competitive. And look at Heidfeld, fourth fastest with a 1:16.239. And if the Bridgestone tyres working well, then both Saubers could come into the equation. Massa, sixth fastest currently. Takuma Sato, a good seventh, despite those problems earlier.
We've taken too much front flap. It's just turn 2 is terrible. Too much understeer. Front tires are just not just pushing into understeer through all the corners. So high speed understeer, low speed is quite good.
Just looking at the Jaguars as we push back into the garage, notable that Jaguar running well, I think a bit more camber. That is, the top of the wheel is more inclined than the bottom of the wheel that maybe we've seen before on some of the Michelin runners, more reminiscent of what you'd see from a Bridgestone tired car. And the reason they do that is just to help the front end bite, particularly in the lower speed corners.
So quick entry into the pits for David Coulthard, 9 laps completed by him. He is currently fourth fastest. Panis has come up to third fastest in the BAR Honda, so perhaps BAR looking at a three-stop strategy here. 1:16.058 for Olivier Panis compared to a 1:17.9 for Jacques Villeneuve. They could be running quite different fuel levels.
And Rubens Barrichello continues on his 9th lap, and he's now again fastest of all through that first sector. But of course what we're seeing here is always this double bluff. Are teams doing something they intend to do in the Grand Prix, or are they just trying to lead other people into thinking that's what they're going to do? Well, what's for sure is that Rubens was very, very quick indeed through that first sector. He was about a 10th and a bit down in the second sector. He's coming down now into this final chicane, and then he dives into the pit. So Barrichello deciding, or the team deciding, no, we want to bring you in. That first sector time, of course, is relatively insignificant. It's the fairly easy side of that track, pretty much this long straight in the Grand Curve and the Estoril curve where Fisichella went off yesterday.
So let's just ride with Panis for a moment. Again, a very fast first sector time for him. Not as fast as Barrichello, but it's a personal best. So it does look as though this car could be running fairly light on fuel. He will be starting today's race, remember, from 11th place. Out-qualified teammate Jacques Villeneuve yesterday using that revised motor, and it worked very well for him. As we're taking a look at Montoya, that launch control will be absolutely crucial from this afternoon's race as he tries to protect pole position. Back with Panis once again. Through the fast sweeping chicane, the Imola chicane, and now a little bit sideways turning into the right-hander.
Yeah, so Panis is pushing very hard. He's got personal best now in second sector as well as the first, and comes down through the chicane and gets through there pretty quickly. I mean, this is a big effort from the Frenchman. Rumours about being under threat was his seat in the BAR team for next year, and in fact Renault indicating that they would not want to be seen to be involved or in any way responsible for losing the sole French driver in Grand Prix racing. That if Jenson Button, who they've now made redundant at the end of this year, were to find his way into the BAR team, that sort of knock-on effect would be seen as negative publicity for Renault and their position in Formula One.
Talking of French drivers, we had an interview earlier on in the programme with Sébastien Bourdais, a French superstar perhaps of the future. He was second yesterday in the Formula 3000 race. He still leads the Formula 3000 championship, but only by 5 points now, because Thomas Enger won again, and he's had 3 victories so far this year, and that's brought the Czech driver to within just 5 points of Sébastien Bourdais. So the battle for the 3000 title is still very much alive.
Yeah, and Sébastien Bourdais actually had a little run last week in Valencia in the Arrows team, would you believe? After all the problems that Arrows have had, they still went testing and did a very respectable job indeed. And on the same day as the quickest time was a 1:11.8, he did a 1:13.2, and that was Alonso and the Renault dominated that testing. But a very, very impressive run from Sébastien Bourdais, and a man definitely of the future, and that's why he's driving for David Sears and his team, and really is the 3000 champion of 2002 in the making.
Well, yes, potentially, but Thomas Enger, as I say, just closing up a little bit more in that points battle, so we'll keep an eye on that. Still some 4 races to go in the championship. Now, Eddie Irvine, as we can see, currently he is 10th fastest, his teammate De La Rosa 12th. And remember, Eddie with his best starting position since Monaco last year, since Monaco 2001. So it's been a long, long time since he's been in the top 10 on the grid. And partly the Michelin tyre, yes, but surely the development work that they've done really has helped them here this weekend. They've used the softer Michelin tyre by the looks of things, but he's into the top 10, and you know, once he starts up there, Eddie's a pretty consistent race performer, an opportunity perhaps to get into the points.
And I think also the very nature of the Manicourt circuit has probably helped Jaguar, because it is a very smooth circuit. You can get more consistency out of aerodynamics, you can run the car marginally stiffer, you can run it marginally lower, and all these things all help to pick up aerodynamic performance. The team really still learning an awful lot about the changes that they've made, as we watch Michael Schumacher just, I think, looking for position on track to make sure there's nobody either ahead of him and nobody coming up behind that may interfere with this lap. So Michael Schumacher goes on to start his 11th lap, and of course this is 12th lap in fact, and watch Schumacher in this lap, because this, I think, is going to be a fairly substantial effort. Of course, depending on how much tyre wear and degradation has occurred on this particular set of tyres, but look, you don't run out that wide if you're just doing a systems check.
Absolutely, he is committed. Montoya's on his first flying lap of the whole session. He's only completed 4 laps. We saw him come in the pits and go back out again. That almost looked like a miscommunication between himself and the pits, because didn't seem to achieve anything. But he's now back out and he's now on a flying lap himself. Michael Schumacher, as you say, on a reasonably quick lap here, although his first sector not the ultimate fastest we've seen so far. 2/10 off Barrichello's best to that point.
And to some degree, I suggest that this is where the tyre performance drop-off begins to show, because there's probably, and Michael a little bit wide. You can see, look again, he got it wrong, and the exit of the first part of Imola, and it really impacted all the way through the second part, then into Chateau d'Eau, and that shows you just how difficult it is once tyre wear starts its process. These tyres maybe have done on this particular session, we've only got just 7.5 minutes remaining, maybe done something like 7 or 8 laps. But he still goes quickest, picked up a bunch of time through second sector fastest and third sector fastest.
Yeah, that was an impressive lap from Michael Schumacher, and you could see how hard he was trying. It would almost look like a qualifying lap, the way he was throwing it around. And he's gone and done a 1:15.0, and that's so much quicker than the lap record. That's almost exactly a second faster than the lap record from last year.
And I think what is impressive is it wasn't done on a tyre that looked to be ostensibly a brand new tyre, or a very, let's say, very fresh tyre. So that was a pretty important lap. And in fact, just to emphasise it, Michael now has gone fastest on his 12th lap in sector 1. It's absolutely stunning. The guy is just pounding out sector time after sector time. And well, if there's ever a message going through to Michelin and Williams BMW, it's happening right now. And this war of psychology, cat and mouse between these two teams over the battle for the lead, not so much of the World Championship, but who's going to win here, and can Michael sew that World Championship up here this afternoon?
Looks to me, just watching Montoya, it looks as though the car could be running a lot of fuel on this Williams, John. The way it's reacting, looking at the split times, it looks as though they're running a fairly heavy car, and on that flying lap he's gone only 11th fastest.
Well, I think this is what we're saying. We're seeing Ferrari going with a relatively light load and going very quickly, and Williams doing the opposite. Ralf Schumacher is 16th on a 17.3. Montoya on his first flying lap effectively 16.7. So clearly those two cars must have substantial amounts of fuel on board. In fact, probably more. Well, maybe let's say about a two-stop strategy. It's difficult to tell. The Ralf Schumacher time clearly not indicative of what the car is capable of, and Ralf did have a couple of spins early in this session.
Now it looks like there's a problem with the seatbelt in Jacques Villeneuve's car. That looks like the seatbelt fixing point where they bring all the harness points together, and they're trying to get that harness sorted out, and hopefully they'll be able to get him out. There's still just 5 minutes to go in this morning warm-up. Villeneuve has currently completed 10 laps and is down in 15th position. We're looking at the sole Jordan in the race, Takuma Sato, competing this afternoon alone. He's 5th fastest, however. Good time, 16.068, just 100th slower than Olivier Panis in the Honda-powered BAR. So Bridgestone users...
Menu and minus.
Bridgestone users dominating this warm-up at the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the fastest Michelin runner, David Coulthard, in 6th.
And here we see Coulthard's teammate Kimi Räikkönen, a brilliant job to get onto the second row of the grid for McLaren. He was disappointed. He said, I thought I could have got third quickest. In fact, just to be truthful, if I really put my mind to it, I should have been in the front row of the grid, because my car and tyres were brilliant all weekend and all afternoon in qualifying. So the young Finn really beginning to bristle, confidence growing, and that sort of qualifying performance will endear him very much indeed to the McLaren team.
Yes, that's right. He said he made his mistake in the first sector, which is unusual. Most people yesterday were making their mistakes in the last sector, in fact the last couple of corners. Kimi said he made just a little mistake in that opening sector, but his last sector was stunning, I remember. Now, yes, Trulli's moved up to 3rd, so he's top Michelin runner and with the fastest final sector time.
Yes, very interesting. After saying the Bridgestone tired cars dominate this session, all of a sudden Jarno Trulli and Renault go 3rd quickest, but significantly quickest in that 3rd sector. That may be a fairly young, fresh set of tyres, so let's keep an eye on what Trulli does on this lap now. And it was a personal best. In fact, it's just slightly off that. Michael Schumacher 14.940. Well, I mean, they're maybe going to make a 4-stop Grand Prix. 1 minute 14.940. Michael Schumacher blows the entire field away, including his teammate, by now almost 0.4 of a second.
Well, Schumacher, absolutely blistering pace from him once again here today as he chases that 5th world title. It will depend on what the others do behind him, but we know Michael, the ultimate competitor, always out there to win the race, no matter what the situation is. Barrichello just about to cross the line, and in fact he goes even faster. He does a 1:14.888, so the Ferraris once again showing tremendous race pace. But one thing to remember, of course, the Ferraris, the Bridgestones are all running very well in these cool morning conditions, but it's going to be hot here later, and that could change the equation a little bit in favour of Michelin.
Well, it's going to be a fantastic Grand Prix. I mean, the whole thing is going to be geared to how tyre wear, tyre degradation principally comes into play, and Michelin and Bridgestone are probably pretty evenly matched. And the Barrichello, look, a further 0.2 of a second faster in that first sector. Remember, Barrichello just established a 14.888. Now if he can maintain this pace, as he's now in that middle stage of the second sector of the lap through the 180, able to get the car positioned into the corner, out of it as he wants. Now the climb, slight uphill up into this Imola chicane. We go back to David Coulthard as he comes up to complete his lap.
Yes, Coulthard currently going to move up. He's 8th at the moment. As he crosses the line, he comes up to 7th. That's a 1:15.817, a 10th slower than Räikkönen. And a very close group of cars, except for the Ferraris. The Ferraris half a second faster than the next best opposition, which currently is Jarno Trulli in the Renault.
Well, it's just 19,000 down. He lost most of that time back in the second sector. He lost probably the best part of 2.1 of a second. And that took away the opportunity to improve. And back into the Williams team garage, and we look at Juan Pablo Montoya, who sat out a fair part of the session, has done 8 laps in total, contrasting that to Michael Schumacher, who's done 16. And in fact, Michael is the driver who's done the most laps so far this morning.
So the Ferrari team doing plenty of work. You know, he did 50 laps completed on the first day, which is unusual for Ferrari, so they've been working quite hard gathering data on the tyres. Of course, there's no action down there at the Arrows pit, I'm afraid. They did not qualify. They've headed back to the UK, and we wait to see whether they will make their reappearance at Hockenheim. Irvine's popped up to 7th fastest now, so that's a good effort. His teammate De La Rosa down in 13th. Other Brits, well, Button's down in 12th place currently. Alan McNish down in 17th place. Sarlo only 1 place ahead of him. They said they were suffering from a lack of traction yesterday. That was their main cause for concern. They hoped that the race setup would be better, but I have to say, looking at Sarlo and McNish's times at the moment, it doesn't look as though they're going to be able to rocket their way up through the grid.
Michael Schumacher fully loaded and committed through Grand Curve and into Estoril, and look at the back of that Ferrari. The balance of the car, that's just about as good as you want it through Estoril. Able to get on the throttle early, get the car, drive out of the corner, pick up good maximum speed. Michael Schumacher currently the quickest, just at 308 kilometers per hour, and already almost 0.2 of a second up once again in that first sector. But remember, it's not the first sector that's critical here. It's sector 2 and more so sector 3. When you come to the end of a lap, when the tyres are screaming for a little bit of a release from the pressure they're under, well, can the Bridgestone stand up to Michael Schumacher?
Checkered flag comes out at the end of the morning warm-up. Michael Schumacher could well go fastest with this final lap of the session. And yes, look at that. He's half a second up on Barrichello's last lap. This is going to put it down into the mid 14-second bracket. And that is an astonishing pace being shown by the Ferraris.
Well, pretty awesome mid-sector. I mean, half a second he gained. So Michael Schumacher, will he lose any or not coming across him? He picks it up 3/4 of a second, 1:14.174. Well, if anybody ever wanted to send out a message to say Bridgestone are in good shape, that was it. But think about 3 stops for Michael Schumacher. And, well, Williams and McLaren, with a different philosophy from Michelin, will have to scratch their heads for 4 hours now to wonder whether they've got their strategies right.
So just finishing off the lap, here comes Jarno Trulli. Well, he comes into the pits now. He's ended up 3rd fastest, so that's a promising performance from the Renault driver. Felipe Massa behind him 4th fastest, and then Nick Heidfeld. So again, the Bridgestone's working well in these cooler morning conditions on the Saubers as well as the Ferraris. Button ends up 6th fastest. Raikkonen 7th, then it's Eddie Irvine. Heidfeld actually still on a lap at the moment, so we may see him go a little quicker as we just take a quick look at Jenson Button, up to 6th fastest now, and remember that he'll be starting this afternoon's race from 7th position on the grid.
And Jenson, I'm sure he must feel disappointment. In fact, we understand he was advised following the British Grand Prix 2 weeks ago that his position at Renault was no longer going to be available to him in 2003. Nevertheless, you know, when the announcement is made public and then you've got to answer the media, they say, well, where are you going to drive, Jenson? He's got something pretty interesting going on, and we expect to hear something fairly shortly from the Button family and the Button management team as to where the future young British world champion, and maybe a little bit further down the future, there's still a bit of learning Jenson has to do, but nonetheless he's got the talent, and when he gets all the ducks lined up, then he will be a world championship contender at some point in his career.
Absolutely right, yes, but it's just a question of where he's going to be. The Ferrari is pushed back in, a bit of brake smoke, as you can see, after some very hard laps on the last few minutes. Nicky Lauda talking to Flavio Briatore, and Alan Henry on the right-hand side of the picture, one of the most respected Formula One journalists, and involved in a fairly in-depth discussion between the two team bosses.
Yes, of course, Nicky was very interested in getting Fernando Alonso to drive for Jaguar, but Flavio Briatore had different ideas about it. So, well, Flavio's got a few other drivers, including Mark Webber on his books, and Mark has impressed, I think, everybody this year with his drives in the Minardi, and I think would make an excellent driver for Jaguar. But of course, it depends whether Eddie Irvine's position has been confirmed that he'll not be there or not, or whether even Pedro de la Rosa, who has a contract for next year, will be retained by the team. So a lot of questions still to be answered, and Nick Damon's review of what we anticipate being the lineup for 2003, I think, is still very much up in the air.
So the morning warm-up, seeing Michael Schumacher fastest from his teammate Barrichello, and very rapid times being set by the Ferraris. Jarno Trulli best of the rest with the Renault, 3rd, and then Felipe Massa and Nick Heidfeld showing the strength of the Saubers, but they'll be starting from 10th and 12th on the grid. Jenson Button 6th fastest, Kimi Raikkonen ahead of Eddie Irvine, who again showing good pace with the Jaguar, then Coulthard and Panis, and then the bottom half of the lineup, Takuma Takuma Sato. Ralf Schumacher down in 12th. Look at Montoya, 14th. Not a cause for concern, but it did indicate that perhaps the Williams cars were running pretty heavy this morning. Villeneuve 15th. The two Toyotas again not showing brilliantly. Again, they may well be running the cars heavy and looking for consistent race pace. Mark Webber then in the Minardi ahead of Alex Young at the back of the field, and that's how they will be starting in the race today. Of course, the two Toyotas and the two Minardis will be the last four cars on the grid. So morning warm-up, no major dramas by the looks of things. It looks as though everybody managed to get a decent number of laps in, and minimum laps actually by Montoya. He only completed 8 versus the 18 from Michael Schumacher. Let's look back over the highlights.